Admiral Rowe pressed the transmit key with one finger, and the bridge went silent. 9,700 ships came, he said. 580 are still moving. I want you to understand that before you decide what happens next. The channel hissed. Somewhere on the other end, on a flagship built from black plating and cold light, someone was listening and saying nothing. Rowe's hand did not shake. He had spent 11 years underwater in submarines, learning how to speak into silence and wait for the ocean to answer. This was not so different. He looked at the number on the tactical display, 580, and knew it was already wrong. It would be lower by the time anyone answered him. I have 4 additional phases that have not been activated, Rowe said. I am telling you this because I want you to make an informed decision. Behind him, nobody on the bridge moved. Not the tactical officer, not the 2 enlisted crew at the side consoles. The only sound was the soft tick of the cooling system and Rowe's own voice, level as a held breath. A translator-flattened voice finally answered. Why? Rowe did not answer that yet. He looked at Earth turning slow and blue in the main window, at the dark scatter of debris still drifting where a wall of ships used to be, and he let the silence stretch one more second before he spoke again. Stay close. What Rowe says in the next 10 minutes will decide who gets to go home and who doesn't. 3 weeks before that channel opened, the stars over the Indian Ocean went out. It happened at 3:14 in the morning, and the first person to notice was a graduate student at an observatory in Chile, watching a patch of sky that had always been there and suddenly wasn't. She checked her equipment twice before she called anyone. By the time she got someone on the phone, the patch had grown. Then it kept growing. 9,700 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a perfect ring around the planet. No warning shot. No radio chatter first. Just mass, an enormous wall of dark metal filling a hole where stars used to be, arranged with a precision that made the shape look less like an invasion and more like a hand closing. 6 hours later, a broadcast went out in 47 languages. Surrender terms. 43 worlds had already been absorbed under the same terms, the message said, and none of them had needed a second broadcast. Admiral Thuron, Rowe watched the countdown on a secondary screen aboard the command vessel Resolute and said nothing for a long time. Sir, the comms officer said, do we respond? No, Rowe said. We wait it out. He had a shaved head and a way of sitting so still that people sometimes thought he'd fallen asleep with his eyes open. He hadn't. He was doing what he'd always done on patrol, back when the hardest part of the job was doing nothing while sonar pinged somewhere in the dark. Slow breath, quiet room, absolute patience. 6 hours passed. No government on Earth surrendered, not one. The deadline came and went the way a held breath finally lets go, and nothing followed it. No cheer, no announcement, just the same quiet room and the same slow blink of the countdown clock resetting itself to 0 and staying there. Grand Commander Vethashek waited 11 minutes past the deadline before he gave the order. He did not enjoy waiting. In 43 campaigns, nobody had ever made him wait this long, and the bioluminescent ridges along his jaw had gone from pale blue to a low simmering red an hour before the deadline even hit. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Yale, stood 2 steps behind him on the flagship bridge and pressed his claws into his own palm, a habit he'd never managed to break. He was watching a number on his own console that made no sense. Earth's defensive readings, what little the Dominion's long-range scans had picked up, showed almost nothing. No visible fleet. No orbital platforms worth the name. A world that by every metric the Dominion trusted should already be finished. That was the wrong detail. Yale filed it away and said nothing, because Ashek did not like being told his math might be incomplete. Bombardment Wave 1, Ashek said. Authorized. 3 weeks earlier than that, the actual beginning, if there was one, Director Oss, had been the first person to decode the Veric approach vector. She was a small woman who wore the same plain grey jacket most days and rarely raised her voice above a murmur, which was part of why most of the room forgot she was in it. She'd spent 9 years studying every recorded Veric engagement anyone on Earth had ever gotten access to. And by the time the stars started going out, she already knew, roughly, what Ashek was going to do before he did it. 43 conquests, she told Roe, laying a folder on the table between them. Same doctrine every time. Surrender demand, bombardment, ground assault. He's not going to improvise. He's going to run the playbook that's worked 43 times in a row. Then we don't fight the playbook, Roe said. No, Ossa said. We fight what's underneath it. That was 3 weeks of quiet work. 40,000 gravity well mines, seeded into the exact orbital paths a Veric fleet formation would need to cross, not visible, not broadcasting, just sitting in the dark, waiting for something large and metal to come close enough to matter. 12 rail guns anchored into the lunar far side, powered down until they were needed. A communications team that had spent 6 days cracking Dominion encryption and 48 hours confirming they had it clean, so that every order Ashek gave from now on would be read on Earth roughly 12 minutes before his own ships received it. None of it had been announced. None of it had shown up on a scan. They'll think we're weak, the comms officer said, during one of the last briefings before the ships arrived. Good, Osse said. Let them. Roe had listened to that exchange without comment, the way he listened to most things, and then he'd gone back to his quarters that night and done something he told no one about. He sat at his desk and began writing letters. He wrote one for each of the 41,000 people the projections said might not survive the next month. That was not realistic, and he knew it. He wrote the first one anyway. Then he stopped, sat with his hands flat on the desk for a while, and started the second. He was still writing them when the stars went out. Now, with the deadline expired and Ashek's first wave already moving, the mines were waiting exactly where Ossa had put them, and nobody on the Veric side had any idea. The mines went off 11 seconds after Ashek's order reached the lead formation. Not all at once. Ossai's team had staggered the proximity triggers on purpose, so the first ring of detonations looked almost accidental, a scatter of white flashes at the formation's outer edge, the kind of thing a fleet might shrug off as debris impact. Then the second ring went. Then the third, closer to the center, and by the time anyone on the Veric side understood what they were looking at, the sky around them had turned into a field of fire they hadn't known was there. 340 ships went dark in 4 minutes and 19 seconds. On the Resolute, nobody cheered. Roe watched the number update on the tactical display and felt something in his chest that wasn't triumph. It sat closer to grief, if grief could hold still and keep working. Sir, the tactical officer said, voice careful, they're regrouping. Of course they are, Roe said. Ashek runs the same doctrine every time. Mines don't change that. He'll shift to his three-wave formation and keep coming. He was right. Aboard the flagship, Ashek's cranial crests had gone rigid, the color along his jaw deepening toward crimson, and he gave the regroup order in a voice that didn't waver even as the casualty count climbed past his console. Yale watched him do it and pressed his claws harder into his palm. 340 ships, gone in under 5 minutes to weapons that hadn't shown up on a single scan. Sir, Yale said quietly, our long-range readings said this world had almost nothing. Then our readings were wrong, Ashek said. It changes nothing, we proceed. That was the wrong kind of certainty, and Yale knew it even as he said nothing further. He'd seen Ashek run this exact doctrine on 43 other worlds, and on every one of them, certainty had been the thing that won. He didn't yet have a name for what this felt like instead. The second wave came from the dark side of the moon. 12 rail guns had sat powered down for 11 days, cold enough that Veric thermal scans read them as bedrock. When they woke, they fired slugs that moved at 8 kilometers a second and carried no light signature at all, no muzzle flash, no drive trail, nothing for a targeting system to lock onto until a hull was already opening. 14 ships died before the Veric fleet even worked out where the shots were coming from. By the time a strike wing reached the coordinates, The guns had already relocated, small automated crawlers dragging each battery a few hundred meters across lunar dust, patient as anything Roe had ever commanded underwater. "They're not there," the wing commander reported, and got no answer, because Ashek had already stopped listening to reports that didn't help him. 200 kilometers below, in a planning bunker in Geneva, Director Ossai watched the same numbers Roe was watching, on a screen 1 floor below ground. She didn't smile. She made a small mark in a notebook and turned to the officer beside her. "Phase 3, she said. "Tell Valkov she's clear to go." Lieutenant Daria Valkov had 80 interceptors and a 40-kilometer gap in the Veric formation that Ossai's models said would open for exactly 90 seconds. She took the gap dark, no active sensors, no radio, engines running on the quietest setting they had, and got 61 ships back out the other side. That was the cost. 19 didn't make it. Valkov didn't say anything about that over comms, not yet, because there wasn't time and because she knew, the way pilots learn to know, that grief could wait for a runway. What the 19 bought was 200 Veric ships going dark from EMP charges planted at close range. Engines and weapon systems fried in the same half-second. Hulls left drifting and helpless in a formation that was starting, for the first time in Ashek's 43 campaigns, to look less like a wall and more like wreckage with gaps in it. Yale watched the number climb on his console and did the arithmetic without meaning to. 340, 14, 200. He didn't say the total out loud. He didn't have to. Ashek's crests had gone fully rigid now, no longer shifting color, locked in a kind of stillness that Yale had never seen on him before and didn't like. "Ground assault," Ashek said. "Now, before we lose the initiative entirely." 800 troop carriers broke from the fleet and began their descent, carrying 2 million soldiers toward a planet that, from orbit, looked disorganized, half-defended, almost easy. It wasn't. Roads that should have led toward major cities had been flooded on purpose. Whole valleys turned into shallow lakes overnight by engineers who'd had 3 weeks to study exactly where the Veric ground doctrine liked to move. Supply coordinates, fed to the invading force through a communications relay that Sergeant Harlow's platoon had captured and quietly rerouted, arrived 11 kilometers off from where they should have. Buildings stood empty. Water systems had been shut down and rerouted through pipes that led nowhere useful. Civilians were gone, not fled in panic, but moved, weeks ago, in an evacuation so quiet most of them hadn't understood what they were part of until it was already done. "They don't understand roads," Harlow said to his platoon, watching a Veric column stall out at a river crossing that used to be a highway. "Not the concept. They understand roads fine. What they don't understand is that a road can be a weapon, same as anything else." 2 million soldiers, and the planet itself seemed to be working against them 1 degree at a time. Not with force, but with patience, the kind that takes 3 weeks to build and looks, from a distance, like nothing at all. Aboard the flagship, Yale delivered the ground reports to Ashek in a voice that had started, very slightly, to shake. "Sir, the advance has stalled on 6 fronts. Supply convoys are being routed into terrain that doesn't match their coordinates. We're seeing this pattern repeat with a consistency that suggests." "That suggests what?" Ashek said. Yale hesitated. He pressed his claws harder into his palm, hard enough that it would leave a mark. "That someone predicted our doctrine before we arrived," he said. "Not reacted to it, predicted it." Ashek didn't answer. Behind him, on the main display, the casualty projections kept climbing, and for the first time in 43 campaigns, he did not immediately know what to say to bring the number back down. Ashek gave the recall order himself, and it cost him more than any of the numbers already on his console. 72 hours after the ground assault began, with 6 fronts stalled and supply lines running into terrain that didn't exist on any map his forces carried, he pulled the troop carriers back off the surface. 60 of them didn't make it through extraction, caught low and slow over territory that had spent 3 weeks learning exactly where to aim. The soldiers who did get out came back with a silence Yale hadn't heard from Veric troops before. not fear exactly. Something closer to a question nobody wanted to ask first. Sir, Yale said, standing at Ashek's shoulder on the flagship bridge, there's a targeting option on the table. Direct strikes against population centers. It would end the ground problem. He hated saying it. He said it anyway, because it was his job to lay out every option, and because some small part of him needed to hear whether Ashek would actually take it. Ashek's jaw ridges pulsed a slow, considering blue going red, the color he got when he was doing math he didn't like the answer to. Not yet, he said. We still have the fleet. We use the fleet first. That was the wrong kind of restraint, and Yale understood it for what it was, not mercy, just sequencing. If the fleet failed, the cities were next. Yale filed that away too, the way he'd been filing things away for 3 days now, a growing stack of small true things he wasn't sure what to do with yet. 600 kilometers below, in the Geneva bunker, Director Oss heard the same intercepted transmission, decrypted, as always, about 12 minutes after Ashek sent it, and made another mark in her notebook without looking up. They're talking about the cities now, said the officer beside her. I know, Osse said. That's why Phase 4 exists. Ashek committed what remained of his fleet, a little over 1,000 ships, the survivors of 3 separate maulings, to a single push through the asteroid belt on the system's fringe. It was, by his own doctrine, the correct move. Concentrate force. Punch through the weakest point. He had done this on 42 of his 43 campaigns, and it had worked every time. The belt had been waiting for him for 3 weeks. 40 million microdrones, each one about the size of a human fist, none of them individually smart, none of them worth a second look on a long-range scan. They didn't need to be smart. They needed to be relentless and patient and willing to keep coming after the first 1,000 of them were shot down, and the second 1,000, and the third. It took 4 hours. Not a single dramatic strike, nothing like the mine grid's opening flash. Just a slow, grinding attrition that ate through the Veric fleet one ship at a time while Ashek watched the number on his display climb in the wrong direction with a horrible, patient consistency. 1,400 ships went dark over those 4 hours. Yale stood at his console and did not press his claws into his palm this time. He'd stopped feeling the sting of it hours ago. He watched the swarm keep coming, watched ship after ship lose power and drift, and understood, really understood, for the first time since the stars had gone out, that this had never been a battle in the way Ashek's doctrine understood battles. It had been an experiment in exactly how long it would take the Dominion to run out of ships. Sir, he said, and his voice had gone flat in a way that had nothing to do with the translator implant. We have approximately 600 vessels still capable of independent flight. Ashek didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had lost the certainty it carried at the start of all this, not broken, not yet, but thinner, like something worn down to the last usable layer. Then we use them, he said. For what objective? Yale said. It wasn't quite a question anymore. Ashek looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, the crests along his skull flattened all the way down, the tell Yale had learned to read as pure uncertainty, the same look Ashek had worn exactly twice before in 11 years of service together. Both times, someone had died shortly after. I don't know yet, Ashek said, and that was the first time in 43 campaigns Yale had ever heard him say it. Aboard the Resolute, Rowe watched the drone swarm numbers settle and felt the room around him exhale just slightly, for the first time in 3 days. 600 ships remaining, the tactical officer reported. Formations breaking up. They're not regrouping this time, sir. It looks like disorder. Rowe nodded once. He didn't smile. He hadn't smiled since this started, and he wasn't going to start now, not with the casualty count still climbing on a side screen nobody had turned off. He walked back to his quarters instead of staying on the bridge, which surprised the junior officer standing watch outside the door. Rowe didn't explain. He sat down at the small desk in the corner, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and picked up a pen that had run half dry 3 letters ago. He didn't have time for this. He knew he didn't have time for this. He wrote anyway, one line, then a second, a short letter to a woman he'd never met, about a soldier whose name he'd had to look up twice to spell correctly. He capped the pen. He looked at it for a moment, set it down at a precise right angle to the paper, and stood up. Then he walked back onto the bridge and told the comms officer to open a channel to the Veric flagship. It took 11 minutes for anyone to respond. When the response came, it wasn't Ashek's voice. It was Yale's, flat, tired, the voice of someone who hadn't slept in 3 days and had stopped being surprised by anything the universe still had left to show him. "This is Subcommander Veth Yale," he said. "State your intent." Rowe didn't answer right away. Behind him, on the main display, 600 Veric ships sat scattered and slow at the edge of the asteroid belt, and beyond them, Earth turned in its ordinary blue light like nothing at all had happened to it. "I want to speak with your commander," Rowe said. Another pause, longer this time. When Ashek's voice finally came through, it carried the same flat mechanical quality it always had, but underneath it, for the first time, there was something careful in it. Something that sounded, almost, like a man choosing his next words very slowly because he no longer trusted his old ones. "I am here," Ashek said. Rowe looked at the number on his display one more time. 580 ships, still functioning, still capable of running or fighting or dying, still full of people who had families somewhere on the other side of the stars, the same as the 41,000 who weren't going home from Earth's side of this. He didn't reach for a script. He never had one. He opened his mouth to answer. "You have roughly 580 ships still functioning," Rowe said. "I want you to understand something before you decide what happens next. The mines, the rail batteries, the swarms, the interceptor run, all of that was Phase 1 and Phase 2 of our defense. We are currently in Phase 3. I have 4 additional phases that have not been activated." He listed them: weapons systems, deployment ranges, estimated effectiveness against fleet-class vessels. He gave the numbers the way he'd give coordinates to a helmsman, flat, exact, no weight added on top of what was already there. "I am telling you this," Rowe said, "because I want you to make an informed decision." On the flagship bridge, nobody spoke for 11 seconds. Yale watched Ashek's jaw ridges cycle through blue, then red, then a color Yale had no name for, somewhere between the two. "Why," Ashek said, "would you tell us this at all?" "Because dead ships don't carry information," Rowe said. "I need you to go home." Yale felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with the translator implant. He thought of the targeting option he'd offered 3 days ago, strikes on population centers, a solution he'd hated proposing and been half relieved to see refused. He understood now why Ashek had said, "not yet," instead of "no." Ashek had been keeping the option open the whole time, a blade held ready in case the fleet failed completely. The fleet had failed completely, and the human admiral was offering a door instead of a killing blow. "There is a corridor," Rowe said. 40 minutes. Any ship that takes it crosses the system boundary without further engagement from us. Any ship that continues on an intercept vector will be treated as a continued attack." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Behind him, on the tactical display, 600 scattered ships sat waiting for an order nobody in 43 campaigns had ever needed to give before. Ashek said nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to Rowe. It was to Yale, standing at his shoulder, in a voice pitched too low for the open channel to carry. "You knew," Ashek said. "The ground reports. You said someone predicted our doctrine before we arrived." "I said it, sir. I didn't understand what it meant until now." "What does it mean?" Yale looked at the display, at the corridor Rowe had opened, at the mines, and the guns, and the drones that had all been waiting 3 weeks before a single ship had dropped out of faster than light. He thought of every world the Dominion had absorbed, 43 of them, each one following the same doctrine, because the doctrine had never once needed to change. "It means," Yale said, "that they didn't fight us, they processed us." Ashek's crests flattened all the way down. The tell Yale had learned to read as pure uncertainty, and this time nobody died right after. This time he just stood there, a commander with 43 victory marks on his shoulder plates and no doctrine left that applied to what had just happened to him. "Corridor accepted," he said. "All surviving vessels, corridor heading immediately." Not every ship listened. 600 ships, and in the confusion of a shattered fleet with half its command structure still catching up to the order, some kept running old attack vectors out of habit, or fear, or simple bad information, passed too late down the chain. Earth systems didn't wait to find out why. Targeting computers flagged continued intercept courses and answered them without anger, the way a lock answers a key that doesn't fit. 18 ships crossed the solar system boundary and kept going. That was the number in the end, not the fleet that arrived, not the 600 that survived the swarm. 18 ships, carrying however many thousand Veric crew, going home to tell the rest of the Dominion what they had seen, or trying to, because Yale intended to make sure the story that spread wasn't just Ashek's. 41,000 people didn't go home. Rowe heard the finalized number 2 days later, delivered by an aide who read it off a tablet in a voice that had learned, over the last 3 weeks, how to say large numbers without letting them mean anything. Rowe thanked him and asked him to leave, and then he sat alone in his office for a while, not moving, the way he used to sit in a submarine control room, listening to a contact that might or might not be a threat. Not soldiers, all of them. People. People with morning routines, with unfinished errands, with things they'd been meaning to do once the war was over. 41,000 of those, and the number would sit on a memorial somewhere eventually, carved into stone that would mean less every year to everyone who hadn't been there. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and picked up his pen. Aboard the retreating Veric formation, Sub-Commander Yale wrote in a personal log he wasn't authorized to keep, in words nobody had told him to choose carefully. The human admiral offered us a corridor. He explained exactly how he could have destroyed us all and chose not to. I do not know if this is mercy or strategy. I think it may be both at the same time. I'm not sure we have a word for that. He didn't know yet that the log would be confiscated when the ship returned to Dominion space, filed as evidence, then leaked, then copied by hand across 17 absorbed worlds over the next 2 years, read by people who had never trusted an official report in their lives, but trusted, somehow, a tired man's honest account of a battle he'd survived by 18 ships out of 9,700. He only knew that writing it down felt like the first true thing he'd done in 3 weeks. 600 kilometers below Rowe's window, in the Geneva bunker, Director Oss closed the folder marked Phase 4 and opened a new one. "Sir," the officer beside her said, "the engagement's over. Command's asking if we should stand down the remaining infrastructure." "No," Osse said. She uncapped a pen and drew a line across a fresh star map, measuring a distance with 2 fingers, the same small unhurried motion she'd used 3 weeks ago when nobody believed 9,700 ships were coming. "They'll come back," she said. "Maybe not this decade, but they'll come back, and next time they won't run the same doctrine because now they know we read it." She wrote a number in the margin, small, in pencil, and didn't say it out loud. "Start on Phase 5. Rowe kept writing letters. He wrote one, set it aside, and started the next, and did not let himself count how many were left because the number would only slow his hand. Outside the window of his office, Earth turned slowly in the light of its sun. No ships in the sky anymore. Just clouds and blue water and the faint edge of a coastline, brown and green, unchanged. He capped the pen and set it down at a precise right angle to the page, the way he always did, and looked at it for a moment before reaching for the next sheet of paper.